"You're not supposed to sit here," Ethan Prescott said, his voice slicing through the hum of the Grand Veritas lounge like a scalpel through silk, and every head in the room turned to watch the young woman standing just beyond the polished mahogany tables. The chandeliers above cast golden rivers of light that reflected in crystal glasses, bouncing off silverware that gleamed like tiny mirrors, while the soft murmur of jazz tickled the edges of the tension like an unseen current. Jasmine Carter, a waitress in her mid-20s with a plain black uniform pressed and spotless sneakers, paused, eyes scanning the room with calm precision, noticing the subtle shifts of every patron's gaze, the faint smirk of a guest who clearly thought he was above her, the barely perceptible roll of an executive's eyes as he adjusted his cufflinks. She had worked nights like this for years, carrying trays that seemed heavier than the weight of the stairs she endured, learning to move through spaces where privilege created invisible walls, where every smile she received felt like a test she never asked to take. Her almond-shaped eyes took in Ethan Prescott, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a tailored gray suit that seemed to command the room before he even spoke, his silver hair slicked back to perfection, and a presence that made the space feel smaller, more rigid, more meticulously controlled. He had just closed a multi-billion-dollar tech merger earlier that week, and yet here, in the subtle hum of glasses and murmurs, he was the center of every unspoken hierarchy, every glance measuring, judging, asserting dominance. Jasmine's lips curved slightly, a quiet determination in the set of her jaw, as she stepped a bit closer, keeping her tray steady, the tiny clink of porcelain marking her approach. "Can I eat with you?" she asked, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the social fog like a shard of sunlight in a dim room. The question, simple on the surface, carried layers of courage, a challenge masked in politeness, and for a heartbeat, the room seemed to exhale and hold its breath. Ethan's icy blue eyes flicked to her, a micro-expression of surprise passing for just an instant. Before his carefully constructed mask of amusement slipped into place, a slight smirk curling at the corner of his lips. The other diners shifted subtly, sensing the tension, some whispering to one another, some lifting their phones discreetly, capturing the moment that promised more than mere dinner service. Jasmine didn't flinch. She held his gaze evenly, poised in the practiced calm that had carried her through countless nights of quiet observation, of learning the subtleties of power and privilege without ever allowing them to touch her dignity. The scent of roasted duck and truffle oil mingled with the faint perfume of the guests, wrapping around the tension like a heavy velvet curtain, and for a moment, the space between Jasmine and Ethan became a silent battlefield, charged with unspoken rules, expectations, and the invisible weight of social hierarchy. Every subtle gesture, the tilt of a head, the tightening of a jaw, the flicker of an eyebrow, was amplified, a symphony of human observation, and Jasmine noticed all of it, cataloging it quietly, choosing precisely how to move, how to breathe, how to hold herself in a room where she was meant to be invisible. And then, with the softest of movements, she set her tray down beside the table, the careful placement of glasses and napkins an act of presence, of assertion without aggression, signaling that she belonged there not by entitlement, but by the quiet claim of her own humanity. Ethan Prescott blinked once, twice, caught off guard by the subtle defiance wrapped in grace, the kind that didn't shout but resonated, leaving a quiet echo of uncertainty in the man who had never been denied control in such a meticulous arena. The murmurs of the room faded into a collective hush, each individual sensing that something significant was unfolding, something beyond wealth, beyond status, beyond the carefully curated image of power that Ethan had so carefully maintained. Jasmine Carter lifted her gaze, soft but unwavering, and in that instant, the invisible walls of the Grand Veritas lounge shifted slightly, bending to accommodate a presence that demanded acknowledgement, not through force, but through dignity, poise, and an unspoken claim to respect. And for the first time that evening, Ethan Prescott, the Billionaire CEO, found himself recalibrating, caught in the quiet shock of being faced with someone who would not be ignored, someone whose simple request for company at a table became an act of power in its purest, most human form. The room remained suspended in a fragile stillness, the golden glow from the chandeliers reflecting in the glassware, as if time itself had slowed to accommodate the tension. Jasmine Carter seated herself across from Ethan Prescott, keeping her posture straight, shoulders back, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the table, her eyes never breaking contact with his. Around them, the murmurs of other diners softened into a low, almost inaudible hum, the subtle clinking of silver cutlery blending with the faint piano notes from the corner, forming a soundscape that both contrasted and highlighted the invisible charge between the two of them. Jasmine's tray, now on a side table, was perfectly aligned, glasses sparkling, napkins folded with precision, signaling a quiet command over her environment that drew attention without force. She exhaled slowly, a controlled breath that carried the weight of confidence, experience, and quiet observation. Ethan Prescott leaned slightly back in his chair, a subtle tension rippling across his broad frame, his hands folded loosely in front of him, fingers tapping in a controlled rhythm against the polished wood. His eyes, sharp and calculating, studied her, scanning for hesitation, for weakness, for any sign that she might crumble under the social scrutiny of the room. Jasmine met his gaze steadily, her expression calm, yet resolute, the slightest hint of a smile at the corner of her lips suggesting awareness of the dynamics at play without tipping into arrogance. The servers passing between tables moved with measured grace, their presence almost ghost-like, yet Jasmine seemed to occupy the room differently, her energy filling the space subtly but unmistakably, making even the most self-assured guests glance her way in fleeting acknowledgement. The scent of roasted lamb and freshly baked bread hung in the air, mingling with the soft floral notes of the centerpiece arrangements, creating an atmosphere of opulence layered with human anticipation. Jasmine observed the subtle shifts around her, a guest adjusting his cufflinks nervously, another sipping champagne a touch too slowly, eyes flicking toward the center of the room, aware that something delicate and remarkable was unfolding. She reached for her glass of water, lifted it smoothly, and took a sip, the motion graceful and deliberate, a small gesture that seemed to punctuate her presence and reassure her own composure. Ethan Prescott's lips pressed into a thin line, his blue eyes narrowing slightly, yet there was no malice, only the sharp awareness of someone encountering an unexpected measure of dignity and quiet fortitude. Jasmine's calm presence, her subtle control over her movements, and the unwavering steadiness of her gaze created a ripple across the table, a gentle but unignorable assertion of space and worth that contrasted sharply with the calculated dominance Ethan had exercised countless times before. The faint hum of the room, the glint of polished glass, the soft glow of golden light, all these elements framed a tableau that held the attention of everyone present, making even the smallest expressions and gestures significant. Jasmine's eyes scanned Ethan's subtle reactions, the almost imperceptible shifts in his posture, and she allowed herself a quiet internal acknowledgement of the power of observation, the strength found in patience, and the influence of presence. Without raising her voice, without demanding attention, she conveyed a sense of equality and respect, forcing Ethan Prescott to recognize, even momentarily, the human weight of her being. The soft murmur of conversation resumed gradually, punctuated by the occasional clink of a glass, yet the air remained charged, the tension between confidence and recognition palpable. Jasmine's composed movements, the deliberate way she adjusted her napkin and seated herself properly, the clarity in her posture and gaze, all worked in concert to transform the energy of the table from expectation to cautious respect. Ethan Prescott, realizing the shift, without yet fully articulating it, exhaled slowly, a subtle concession to the undeniable presence of Jasmine Carter, whose quiet authority had made itself known without a single raised voice or confrontational gesture. In that shared moment across the polished mahogany, the air itself seemed to bend around her poise, marking the subtle yet profound effect a single individual could exert in the midst of wealth, influence, and meticulously maintained social hierarchies. Every guest in the room sensed it, the invisible shift in the dynamics of attention and acknowledgement, a recognition that power and respect could exist independently of status, and that Jasmine Carter, with quiet grace and unwavering presence, had already begun to rewrite the room's expectations. The soft glow of candlelight flickered across the table, casting delicate shadows that danced along the polished surfaces, and Jasmine Carter remained seated, her back straight, her hands resting lightly on her lap, eyes scanning the subtle expressions of the surrounding guests. Each person in the Grand Veritas lounge seemed to hold their breath, sensing the unspoken dialogue unfolding between her and Ethan Prescott, whose posture remained rigid yet slightly uncertain, the faint furrow of his brow betraying the meticulous control he had always maintained. Jasmine's presence, calm and assured, began to ripple outward, affecting the energy of the room. The clinking of glasses, the quiet shuffle of silverware, and the soft notes of the piano seemed to align with the rhythm of her composure, forming an unspoken harmony that contrasted sharply with the tense authority Ethan exuded. She tilted her head just slightly, observing the subtle changes in his demeanor, the way his eyes darted momentarily to the other diners before returning to her, as if recalibrating his expectations and reassessing the balance of the moment. Jasmine's every movement was measured, deliberate, the gentle adjustment of her napkin, the slight crossing of her ankles, the composed way she rested her hands, all spoke of a quiet command, an innate understanding of influence that did not require loud proclamations or visible assertion. Ethan Prescott, accustomed to the deference his presence demanded, found the stillness challenging, an unfamiliar sensation in a space where he had long dictated the flow of attention and respect. The warmth of the golden light reflected off the crystal and silver, catching in Ethan's sharp eyes as he noticed the subtle confidence in Jasmine's posture, the effortless way she engaged with the space around her without intrusion, marking her as someone who understood the language of quiet authority. Jasmine allowed herself a slow, deliberate breath, the inhale and exhale measured like a metronome, grounding her in the reality of the room, while simultaneously signaling to those around her that the simple act of presence could wield a force more persuasive than any spoken word. The guests, now subtly leaning in, their attention drawn to the exchange, watched as Ethan's carefully maintained composure wavered ever so slightly, a crack in the armor of habitual control, as if the recognition of Jasmine's unspoken dignity created a momentary recalibration in the social hierarchy. Jasmine's gaze softened fractionally, not from concession, but from awareness of her own influence, and the faintest curve of a smile hinted at an internal acknowledgement that the dynamics at the table had shifted, that the energy she brought into the space had quietly, yet undeniably, altered the rhythm of the evening. Around them, the room seemed to exhale slowly, the subtle hum of conversation resuming in gentle waves, punctuated by the occasional sound of polished glass or silverware, each noise now colored by the lingering tension of what had just transpired. Jasmine shifted slightly, maintaining her posture, and in that measured movement, she conveyed that the space she occupied was both earned and natural, a quiet declaration of worth that required no validation from the billionaire before her. Ethan Prescott's shoulders, previously squared in meticulous authority, relaxed imperceptibly, his eyes reflecting a newfound consideration, a silent acknowledgement of the presence of someone who could stand beside him without yielding to the weight of status or expectation. The ambient glow of the room, the subtle sense of roasted lamb and fresh herbs, the faint rustle of linens and movement of attentive staff, all became part of the canvas upon which this quiet interplay of observation, awareness, and mutual recognition unfolded. Jasmine's steady gaze, her deliberate calm, and her poised composure created a ripple effect across the table and into the room, reshaping perceptions in a way that was both subtle and profound, reminding everyone present that influence could be asserted not only through power or wealth, but through the simple, unwavering presence of integrity, dignity, and quiet confidence. And for that brief, charged moment, the Grand Veritas Lounge held its collective breath, witnessing the profound resonance of one individual quietly, decisively reshaping the atmosphere of a room that had long been dominated by unquestioned authority. The soft lighting of the Grand Veritas Lounge cast long, warm reflections across the polished mahogany, accentuating the subtle gleam in the crystal glasses and the delicate folds of the linen napkins. Jasmine Carter remained seated with an effortless composure, her hands resting lightly atop the table, fingers tracing invisible patterns on the smooth surface as her eyes surveyed the room with a measured attentiveness that belied her years of experience. Each movement of her posture, the slight tilt of her head, the gentle alignment of her shoulders, conveyed a quiet authority that drew the attention of the surrounding guests, who began to register her presence beyond the simplicity of her uniform. Ethan Prescott, sitting across from her, exuded the unmistakable aura of a man used to commanding rooms, yet there was a subtle tension in the tightening of his jaw and the measured blink of his eyes, an acknowledgement of the unexpected equilibrium Jasmine had introduced. The soft jazz played on, notes floating like whispers over the room, mingling with the clink of fine china and the occasional murmur of well-dressed diners, creating a soundscape that felt almost suspended, as though the air itself were holding its breath in anticipation. Jasmine reached for her glass of water with a precise, deliberate motion, the faint chime of ice against glass punctuating the silence and emphasizing the attentive steadiness she maintained. Every gesture was intentional, a visual language of poise and self-assurance that silently communicated competence, observation, and respect, drawing Ethan's gaze back to her repeatedly, compelling him to acknowledge the quiet strength she radiated. The scent of roasted duck mingled with subtle hints of truffle oil, floating from the kitchen through the soft hum of waitstaff passing by. But Jasmine remained impervious to distraction, each sensory detail absorbed and cataloged with the focus of someone who had spent years mastering awareness in spaces where she was often overlooked. Ethan's hands rested on the table, his fingers gently drumming in rhythm against the smooth wood as he considered her, the calculations in his mind tempered by the realization that this encounter was unlike the ordinary interactions he navigated with clients and executives. Jasmine's posture shifted ever so slightly, a subtle alignment of spine and shoulders that spoke of confidence without aggression, a silent demonstration that presence and dignity could command attention and respect without the need for overt assertion. The room, filled with the soft glow of golden light reflecting in crystal and polished silver, seemed to adjust around her, the subtle shifts in attention from nearby diners and servers acknowledging the unspoken influence she now exerted. Jasmine's eyes held a steady, observant clarity, taking in each nuanced expression, each slight movement of Ethan's frame, and responding with controlled calm, her silent dialogue woven into the rhythms of the evening. Ethan Prescott, feeling the imperceptible shift in energy, exhaled slowly, the tension easing from his shoulders as he allowed himself a fleeting recognition of Jasmine's quiet command over the space, an acknowledgement of the fact that influence did not solely reside in titles, wealth, or stature, but in the poised, deliberate assertion of self and the unshakable confidence that accompanied it. The ambient sounds, the soft scratch of silver against plates, the gentle rustle of napkins, and the delicate notes of piano, accentuated the charged atmosphere, creating an almost cinematic tableau in which every glance, every posture, every subtle interaction carried weight. Jasmine's calm, measured presence, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the precise yet unassuming way she occupied her space, transformed the energy of the table, influencing not only Ethan Prescott, but also the subtle perceptions of those observing, reminding everyone that authority could emerge through dignity, poise, and integrity as powerfully as through wealth and social dominance. In that luminous space of quiet observation, Jasmine Carter had established herself as an undeniable presence, one whose influence was felt in the stillness, the attentive gaze, and the meticulous awareness she brought to every corner of the room, leaving a palpable mark on the energy of the Grand Veritas Lounge that lingered long after a single movement or gesture. A reminder that the most profound impact often arrived softly, without proclamation, and yet with unyielding clarity. The subtle tension in the Grand Veritas Lounge continued to build, each gentle movement and soft sigh echoing in the minds of the diners as Jasmine Carter adjusted her posture with meticulous precision, her hands resting lightly on her lap as she observed the nuances of Ethan Prescott's reactions. The warm amber light from the chandeliers flickered over the crystal glasses, illuminating the room with a soft glow that reflected off polished silver and the folds of white linen, adding depth to the already charged atmosphere. Jasmine's eyes traced the shifts in posture and subtle facial expressions of the surrounding guests, each whisper and glance amplified in the stillness, while Ethan's gaze remained fixed on her, a mixture of surprise and restrained curiosity, betraying the composure he had so carefully cultivated throughout his years in the boardroom. The faint rustle of menus and the soft scrape of chair legs against the floor became part of an intricate symphony of observation, framing a moment that felt suspended in both time and consequence. Jasmine's calm, steady breathing harmonized with the gentle flow of the ambient music, each inhalation and exhalation measured and deliberate, signaling a presence that was both commanding and unintrusive, compelling attention without demanding it. Ethan Prescott's fingers drummed lightly on the edge of the table, a rhythmic counterpoint to the soft clink of glasses and the quiet hum of conversations nearby, as he absorbed the unexpected confidence that Jasmine radiated. The subtlety of her gestures, the poised alignment of her shoulders, the deliberate placement of her hands and tray, conveyed an unspoken authority, a quiet command of space that contrasted sharply with the overt dominance typically exercised in such an environment, and the awareness of that contrast began to ripple through the room. Guests shifted imperceptibly, leaning slightly forward or straightening their posture as they registered the interplay of composure and respect, the invisible but palpable tension acting as a quiet magnet for attention, drawing the eyes and thoughts of everyone present toward the two central figures. Jasmine's gaze remained unwavering, holding the unspoken dialogue between her and Ethan, her presence a reminder that dignity and quiet confidence could shape perception just as power and wealth often did, and perhaps more effectively in this charged moment. The aroma of roasted vegetables and freshly baked bread floated from the kitchen, intertwining with the delicate floral scents of the table arrangements, layering the sensory environment with richness that contrasted with the understated assertion of Jasmine's calm demeanor. Ethan Prescott's shoulders, once rigid with the habitual control of authority, relaxed ever so slightly, a subtle concession to the undeniable presence before him, as he acknowledged, if only internally, the influence Jasmine held through her measured poise and quiet command. Each micro-expression, each controlled movement, and each silent exchange of acknowledgement between them resonated with the room, heightening the awareness of every observer and imbuing the space with an energy that was both intense and profoundly understated. Jasmine's composed attention to detail, the deliberate grace in her motions, and the clarity of her focus created a ripple effect, influencing not only Ethan but the entire atmosphere. As the room adjusted to accommodate the shift in perception and authority she had initiated without uttering another word. The flickering candlelight, the polished surfaces, the faintly playing piano, and the subtle movement of the waitstaff all framed this tableau of unspoken recognition, highlighting the remarkable weight of presence, integrity, and dignity in a setting dominated by wealth and social expectation. Jasmine Carter, with her unwavering poise, had transformed a simple act of sitting at a table into a demonstration of quiet influence and remarkable composure, subtly reshaping the energy of the room, commanding acknowledgement, and leaving an indelible impression that extended far beyond the mere mechanics of the evening. The subtle shift in energy around the table became more pronounced as Jasmine Carter maintained her composed presence, her movements deliberate, each gesture carefully measured, the gentle placement of her hands, and the slight adjustment of her posture reinforcing the quiet authority she carried effortlessly. The soft glow from the chandeliers above reflected off the crystal glassware, casting delicate patterns across the polished mahogany, and the faint notes of piano, mingling with the subdued murmur of conversation, seemed to accentuate the tension that now carried a different weight, one of attention and anticipation rather than dominance. Jasmine's eyes traced the slight movements of Ethan Prescott, noting the brief hesitation in his expression, the subtle narrowing of his eyes as he considered her, the tiny shifts in his shoulders, and the almost imperceptible change in the set of his mouth, all signaling the realization that the dynamics at this table were unlike any he had navigated before. The guests, attuned to the charged atmosphere, adjusted their posture, leaning forward or sitting straighter, quietly observing the interaction, each movement an expression magnified by the silence that now framed Jasmine's composed demeanor. She lifted her water glass once more, the faint chime of ice against glass resonating softly in the room, a subtle yet clear assertion of presence that drew attention without words, commanding acknowledgement through action and poise. Ethan Prescott's hands, previously resting calmly on the table, moved slightly, folding together in a gesture that suggested contemplation, an internal assessment of the unexpected steadiness and quiet authority that Jasmine projected with every motion. The delicate scents of roasted lamb and fresh herbs filled the air, blending with the soft floral aroma of the centerpiece arrangements, forming a rich sensory backdrop that framed the moment with a layer of understated elegance. Jasmine's composure remained unshaken, her breathing measured and deliberate, a quiet rhythm that seemed to influence the tempo of the room itself, subtly guiding the energy and drawing attention to her unwavering presence. The faint hum of conversation, the gentle scrape of silverware, and the occasional clink of a glass served to highlight, rather than diminish, the silent dialogue between her and Ethan, emphasizing the nuanced power of observation, patience, and subtle influence. Ethan Prescott, absorbing the scene, allowed his eyes to linger on Jasmine, recognizing the unexpected equilibrium she had introduced, a balance that contrasted with his habitual control, and a realization dawned that authority could be acknowledged in the quiet strength and dignity of another without diminishing his own presence. Jasmine's gaze remained steady, unwavering, conveying both awareness and confidence, the faint curve of a smile suggesting an understanding of the effect she was having, the quiet command of space achieved not through force, but through grace and attentive presence. Around them, the room adjusted subtly, the ambient light reflecting differently in the crystal and polished surfaces, the atmosphere subtly bending to accommodate the silent assertion of dignity and poise that Jasmine displayed, a demonstration that influence and respect could be established without overt confrontation, yet felt profoundly by all who witnessed it. Ethan Prescott exhaled slowly, a subtle release of tension, the first acknowledgement of Jasmine's quiet mastery of the social dynamics in play, and the air between them shifted imperceptibly, charged with the mutual recognition of competence, presence, and the power inherent in unshakable composure. Jasmine Carter's careful movements, the deliberate steadiness of her posture, and the clarity of her attentive gaze created a ripple through the room, influencing not only Ethan Prescott, but the awareness of every guest, each sensing the quiet transformation of the table's energy, the subtle assertion of authority and dignity that transcended status, wealth, and expectation, leaving a lasting impression that spoke to the profound impact one individual could achieve through presence, integrity, and quiet confidence. The atmosphere in the Grand Veritas lounge shifted subtly, as though the room itself acknowledged the presence of someone who had quietly transformed the balance of attention and influence. Jasmine Carter remained seated with composed grace, her hands resting lightly on the polished mahogany, her posture impeccable, and her eyes conveying an awareness that extended beyond the immediate table. Ethan Prescott leaned back slightly, his fingers lightly touching the edge of his glass, a subtle movement that betrayed the recalibration of his perception, the recognition that the quiet authority Jasmine exhibited demanded acknowledgement in a way that neither wealth nor status could command. The flickering light from the chandeliers above cast a warm, golden glow across the table, reflecting off crystal glasses and polished silver, highlighting the precision of Jasmine's composed gestures and the meticulous alignment of the table settings. The soft piano notes continued to float through the room, mingling with the faint hum of conversation from surrounding diners, yet all peripheral noise seemed to retreat in the presence of the subtle but unmistakable dynamic unfolding at the center. Jasmine's eyes followed the micro-expressions of Ethan Prescott, noting the slight rise of his eyebrow, the brief shift in the angle of his jaw, the momentary pause in the rhythm of his breathing, all signals of an internal acknowledgement of the quiet strength she projected. She allowed a controlled, deliberate breath, steadying the cadence of her presence, each exhalation reinforcing the calm authority she carried without overt assertion. Around them, the guests absorbed the nuanced interplay, some leaning slightly forward, others tilting their heads in silent curiosity, each witness to a demonstration of influence executed through patience, observation, and measured composure rather than spoken command. Jasmine's subtle movements, the placement of her hands, the gentle crossing of her ankles, the precise tilt of her head, communicated a poise that reshaped the energy of the space, commanding recognition without intrusion and compelling Ethan Prescott to confront a dynamic he had not anticipated. The warm scent of roasted meats and fresh herbs mingled with the faint floral notes of the table arrangements, layering the sensory environment with richness that contrasted with the understated force of Jasmine's presence, emphasizing the impact of her dignity and measured engagement. Ethan's eyes softened slightly, the corner of his mouth hinting at acknowledgement, a fleeting but meaningful concession to the influence Jasmine held, an understanding that authority could be felt and respected without the need for domination. The subtle murmur of conversations and the gentle clink of silverware punctuated the tension, yet all actions, gestures, and expressions centered on the table reflected the recalibration of attention and acknowledgement, the invisible yet tangible recognition of Jasmine's impact. Her calm, measured demeanor radiated outward, creating a ripple across the table, affecting not only Ethan Prescott, but also the ambient awareness of the diners, who sensed the delicate but profound shift in dynamics. Jasmine's steady gaze, her controlled breathing, and the elegance of her posture framed a demonstration of presence and human dignity, revealing that influence could arise from quiet confidence, integrity, and the unwavering acknowledgement of self-worth. The ambient lighting, the reflections from crystal and silver, and the soft movements of attentive staff combined to emphasize the subtle yet powerful exchange of respect and recognition unfolding in real time. Jasmine Carter's poised engagement transformed the table into a space where perception, patience, and quiet authority held sway, compelling acknowledgement from Ethan Prescott and leaving an indelible impression on all who observed, demonstrating that dignity and composure could command attention and respect more profoundly than any declaration of power or display of wealth. The subtle power balance at the table continued to evolve as Jasmine Carter remained seated with a calm, unshakable poise, her hands resting lightly on the smooth surface of the mahogany, while her gaze remained focused, steady, and aware of every nuance in Ethan Prescott's posture and expression. The golden light from the chandeliers above shimmered across the crystal and silver, accentuating the deliberate alignment of her tray and the meticulous arrangement of the table, each detail reinforcing the quiet authority she exuded without a single raised voice. Ethan Prescott leaned slightly forward, his brow furrowed just enough to reveal contemplation, the tension in his shoulders softening imperceptibly as he absorbed the weight of her presence, realizing that the exchange before him was not a challenge of wealth or status, but a demonstration of measured confidence, observation, and integrity. The soft, flowing notes of the piano continued to fill the air, blending with the subtle hum of conversations and the occasional clink of silverware. Yet all sounds seemed to orbit around the tension and calm of this central exchange, emphasizing the importance of the quiet authority Jasmine brought to the moment. Jasmine's movements remained precise and purposeful, the slight tilt of her head, the graceful placement of her hands, and the controlled adjustment of her posture conveying the depth of her awareness, her ability to influence perception, and her mastery of the subtle language of presence. Ethan Prescott's eyes, sharp and calculating, softened as he registered the impact of her demeanor, the recognition dawning that respect and influence could be earned through composure and dignity as much as through power and wealth, and that the subtle, measured manner in which she conducted herself had quietly reshaped the dynamics of the room. The ambient sense of roasted vegetables, fresh herbs, and subtly perfumed floral arrangements framed the scene, adding richness to the sensory environment, while Jasmine's calm, deliberate breathing and attentive focus drew the attention of the diners, guiding their perception without overt action. Every guest at the table, and those nearby, felt the quiet gravity of Jasmine's presence, the deliberate, unassuming manner in which she occupied space, transforming the energy of the room, compelling acknowledgement and subtle admiration. Ethan Prescott's posture shifted slightly, a faint exhale marking the acknowledgement of her influence, the first quiet concession that the balance of authority was no longer dictated solely by his presence. Jasmine's gaze remained unwavering, her subtle movements, resting her hands lightly, adjusting the placement of a napkin, a measured glance to observe reaction, speaking volumes without uttering a word, illustrating the power of poise, preparation, and unspoken confidence. The glint of light on crystal, the polished surfaces, the soft movements of the servers, and the murmurs of other diners framed the scene as a tableau of subtle but undeniable influence, highlighting the remarkable impact one individual could have through presence, integrity, and controlled composure. Jasmine Carter had created a space where quiet authority commanded attention, where every motion and microexpression contributed to the reshaping of perception, compelling Ethan Prescott to acknowledge her with a newfound respect and causing the room itself to respond, a subtle hum of awareness echoing the shift in dynamics that had quietly, yet unmistakably, unfolded. In that charged atmosphere, the Grand Veritas Lounge seemed to bend around the poise and dignity Jasmine projected, demonstrating that influence and respect could emerge through quiet, deliberate, and confident presence, leaving an impression that extended beyond a single moment or a single table, establishing her as a remarkable figure whose authority was both understated and undeniably acknowledged. As the evening deepened, the Grand Veritas Lounge seemed to exhale the tension that had held the room in quiet anticipation, softening into a collective acknowledgement of Jasmine Carter's presence and poise. Her hands rested gently on the polished mahogany, fingers barely moving, yet every slight gesture seemed magnified by the attentive eyes around her, each movement communicating a balance of calm authority and measured elegance that resonated across the room. The golden chandelier light shimmered across the crystal, catching in the subtle angles of her face, illuminating the steady gaze she maintained on Ethan Prescott, whose own posture, once rigid with habitual command, now displayed a rare softness, a tentative recognition of the quiet influence Jasmine had exerted through presence alone. The soft strains of the piano continued to weave through the ambient hum of conversation, blending with the faint clinking of glasses and silverware, but all sounds seemed to orbit the central exchange, framing the nuanced dialogue of attention, perception, and acknowledgement unfolding between the two. Jasmine shifted ever so slightly, a gentle alignment of shoulders and a measured tilt of her head, her movements deliberate yet effortless, conveying awareness and control without a single word, demonstrating that dignity and quiet confidence could command the attention and respect of even the most accustomed to dominance. Ethan Prescott's eyes tracked her movements carefully, the brief relaxation of his jaw and the subtle exhale signaling the internal acknowledgement of her composed authority, an unspoken concession that influence could emerge through grace and poise rather than force or status. The aroma of the evening's menu, a combination of roasted lamb, fresh herbs, and delicate floral accents from the table arrangements, layered the sensory atmosphere, highlighting the contrast between the opulent environment and the understated, commanding presence Jasmine maintained. Around the table, guests shifted imperceptibly, leaning slightly forward or adjusting their posture to absorb the charged, yet understated, dynamics, their attention subtly guided by the demonstration of calm authority and measured confidence that emanated from Jasmine. Each glance, each microexpression, and each controlled gesture between Jasmine and Ethan seemed magnified in the awareness of the room, creating a silent recognition that the balance of power had been quietly recalibrated. Jasmine's composed presence, the subtle rhythm of her breathing, and the precision of her movements created a ripple effect, influencing not only Ethan Prescott, but also the perceptions of every observer, embedding a subtle but profound awareness of dignity, self-assuredness, and the quiet assertion of respect. Ethan's posture shifted with a slow, considered movement, the first acknowledgement of the weight of her influence, the recognition that the authority exerted through wealth and position was not the only form of impact, and that the measured, unwavering presence Jasmine displayed carried a force of its own. The room seemed to settle around this newfound equilibrium, the gentle flicker of candlelight, the reflections on crystal and polished surfaces, and the faint murmur of conversation all emphasizing the quiet but undeniable change in atmosphere. Jasmine Carter, seated with calm, deliberate composure, had transformed a simple shared table into a space where influence, respect, and acknowledgement were earned through dignity, awareness, and subtle command, leaving a lasting impression that extended beyond the immediate interaction, demonstrating the profound resonance of quiet confidence and the human power of presence within a room accustomed to overt displays of status,